Druids had a bit of a rough start to Dragonflight, then they got buffed really hard midway through the expansion, then nerfed almost immediately after that, and now here they are. Kinda middle of the pack. They are straight up okay. How's that for a sales pitch? They're alright. Well, guess what? It keeps getting better. They've gotten nerfed. That's right, they are functionally the same class after patch 11.0 as they were before, but weaker. How do you like that? No? Well, sorry. Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to talk about how to play Guardian Druid in patch 11.0. The War Within is right around the corner. Now is the time to start getting hyped, but first don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, so as for changes, I think the biggest change to the Druid class as a whole is that you can now Dragon Ride while in flight form, which is genuinely pretty dope. It's pretty awesome. Here is me flying around in Orgrimmar on the beta, because, why not? It is kind of janky. There are a lot of people here. Oh my god, look at my frames. They're going straight into the toilet. Now, as for what Blizzard is changing specifically for Bear Druids that involves changes in functionality or the way that you would play the class, I got nothing. Now, there are some nerfs. I've already covered those in a lot more detail in a previous video, but I will talk about the ones that maybe have some impact on things. And that would specifically be these couple of ones right here: Reinvigoration, Earth Warden, Survival of the Fittest all being nerfed, and also After the Wildfire being nerfed. I think those 4 talents all being nerfed really kind of make you funnel away from the outsides of the Bear talent tree. These 2 talents were nerfed, and these 2 talents, this one and this one, were nerfed, and so I think you just kind of hang to the middle of the tree, which was already fairly competitive anyway. Now it's completely dominant. Alright, as for talents, there were no changes to the Bear Druid talent tree other than those nerfs. There were no sort of functionality changes. There was no sort of reconfiguration of the tree. There was nothing interesting. I've been wanting Lunar Beam to get a significant buff for a long time. As you can see, it does 131,000 damage, and if we compare that to a Bear form Moonfire, 231,000 damage over its duration. Yeah, it's stronger than the 1-minute cooldown. By a lot. That's pretty depressing. Now, as you can see, the left-hand tree has gotten a redesign, a bit of a rework here. There's definitely been some stuff that's changed over here. Unfortunately, I think it might actually be worse than the way it was before. You are still compelled to travel through a fair number of talents that you have either limited or no use for in some situations, things like Rejuvenation and Remove Corruption and Soothe. Remove Corruption and Soothe can be useful group utility in some situations, but if you want to just come down here and get Rising Light and Falling Night and just be stronger when you're in raid, and you have no role of CCing or dispelling or healing, you still gotta take these talents, even though they do nothing. If you want to come down and take Stampeding Roar and improve Stampeding Roar, you have to take Ursol's Vortex and Soothe, even if you're in raid and not gonna make any use of them. This is not great. As a result, it makes it pretty hard to justify coming over and taking Feline Swiftness, which is a pretty nice movement speed bonus that I really like. You have to give up some value in order to get it. This sucks. I hate this. There's really no other way to put it. It is terrible. Additionally, Well-Honed Instincts, a pretty good defensive lifeline, has had its base cooldown moved up to 120 seconds, and it's just a straight 1-pointer now. All 3 of these sort of gates here down at the bottom are 2-pointers, and they give increased damage, 10% more damage with physical, 10% more magic damage, 6% versatility while you're in bear form. Great. But a lot of the capstones here, Nature's Vigil, it's still in its mid-expansion nerfed state, not really all that great. Innervate is okay, definitely useful group utility to be able to opt into. But a lot of these talents really aren't doing much. Heart of the Wild and Fluid Form, not really that valuable. It's a lot of just being forced through really lackluster talents, or, having to opt into basic functionality of the class. Things like Iron Fur, Verdant Heart, Thick Hide, a lot of stuff that, is really competing for a very limited number of points. So very disappointing on the left-hand tree, and even more disappointing on the right-hand tree that there is really nothing new or interesting to look forward to at all. I will point out that with After the Wildfire, having had its rage cost, even though this tooltip isn't updated, having had its rage cost increase from 200 rage to 300 rage, that's basically a 50% nerf, but it's worse than that because health values have also increased by 60%. So if we look at my health value, 8.4 million in this sort of normal raid level gear, and the heal that I would provide with this after the wildfire is 400,000 healing, so that is about 5% of my health, and that's every 300 rage. That is really, really bad now, unfortunately. It is still uncapped group healing, so I guess there is value to it. Maybe you could like hypothetically justify it, but because there have been so many other nerfs to Bear Druid, I just don't think it's really very good now. And that's pretty disappointing because that was about the only thing that I thought the Bear Druid really brought to groups that was kind of unique, fancy, interesting value. And, you know, you can still group heal with Dream of Cenarius. Some people like to use that. I am not a huge fan. I kind of like to just be lazy and take Ursoc's Endurance, but you can definitely do that instead of taking Ursoc's Endurance or instead of taking Reinforced Fur, potentially. Either of those, you know, I think Ursoc's Endurance is maybe a little bit easier to play with. I kind of prefer it to Reinforce Fur, a little bit more value. But honestly, I'd rather be lazy and just take all of these talents right here in a line. I suppose you could drop Gory Fur. That probably would be the move. Drop Gory Fur, and then there you go. You're good to go. Take a Dream of Cenarius and all of these bad boys, and not ever thinking about after the wildfire, at least for a while. All right, now I'm going to move on to the Bear Druid rotation. Mangle, Thrash, Raise, and Moonfire are your core rotational skills. You want to use Thrash on cooldown, Mangle on cooldown after that, and then maintain the Moonfire debuff on enemies. If you have a Tooth and Claw empowered Maul cast available, you should spend those on Raise in AoE situations or Maul in single target. Swipe is mainly only used as a fallback skill when you have none of those other skills available and you don't need to refresh Moonfire. Raise and Maul are your offensive rage spenders. Raise is for AoE, Maul is for single target. They deal a lot of damage and they shield you for a percentage of that damage, although that number has gone from midway through Dragonflight, it was 60% of that damage, and then it was 40% or 45%. Now it's all the way down to 25%, so, you know, that really isn't a huge contribution. Most of the time when you're tanking, you should try to maintain at least one stack of Iron Fur, possibly two. If you're taking a lot of damage, you can try and just push that Iron Fur button a little bit harder and shoot for like 3 stacks, especially for big burst damage, physical damage hits, you can do that. But your goal really is to raise and maul as much as you can afford to while not letting Iron Fur fall off. Okay, now I want to talk about cooldowns for Bear Druid. Incarnation and Rage of the Sleeper are the big two. Unless you're holding them for a specific purpose, maybe you're near the end of the pull or you are waiting for a increased damage taken phase to start, you should try to use them on cooldown. Whenever possible, you should try to overlap them as they will give you a lot more damage when they're used together than when they are used separately. During Incarnation, you still want to raise or maul as much as you can afford. Cast Thrash and Mangle as much as needed to keep generating rage and maintaining Thrash, but the goal really is to raise or maul as much as possible. You still want to stack Thrash up initially, you know, Thrash, whatever, Thrash, Mangle, Thrash, Maul, Thrash, Mangle, until you've gotten it fully stacked, then maintain Thrash and Moonfire throughout the period of Incarnation, but again, raise and maul are really your top priority during Incarn. As for your defensive cooldowns, Bark Skin is kind of weak, but it is long and on a short cooldown, so the uptime is very good. You want to use that very often, especially at the start of pulls. Survival Instincts is a much stronger cooldown, but the cooldown is very long, so it's mainly for dealing with big boss mechanics or really tough spots in pulls. As for group utility, you have Typhoon, Ursal's Vortex, its Stampeding Roar, and then potentially Nature's Vigil and Innervate as well. Use them all pretty much as you can. Now I'll talk about how to pull on a Bear Druid, and it is one of the easiest tanks to pull with. If you have Incarn available, you run in Thrash, Mangle, Incarn, Rage of the Sleeper, Thrash, Raise, Thrash, Mangle, Thrash, Raise, you know, do all of that while also hitting Iron Fur. If you don't have Incarn, it's still pretty easy. You want to Thrash Bark Skin as soon as you're in melee range, and then Mangle, Swipe, you know, Moonfire. Basically just keep going until you get Mangle or Thrash available and generate Rage so that you can use Iron Fur and Raise, and you will apply Moonfire to everything in the pull that you can, but really hitting skills like Thrash, Mangle, and Raise to deal direct damage are more important early on in a pull to establish initial threat, since they will deal more upfront damage and generate more threat than the initial hit of a Moonfire, which does very little damage. In terms of stats, agility is the best stat, so maximizing your item level is the most important aspect of gearing, with secondary stat balance being secondary. As for enchants, gems, and crafted gear, you want to enchant and gem for versatility, then haste is your second best secondary stat, and mastery and crit are both fine. Okay, look, here's the deal with druids. They're pretty decent. I like to joke about them being mid, but the fact of the matter is that they are very tanky and they're very easy to play, they're resilient, they have good group utility, and they're pretty fun. I like them. I like one of their hero talent trees, which could be better, but I still think they're in decent shape heading into the next expansion, even though they were the tank that was hit the hardest with the nerfs. Bear Druid mains, even prior to the nerfs, have been going through the 5 stages of grief. They're somewhere between bargaining and depression at the moment, but I actually think the class is not in the horrible shambles that a lot of people feel that it is. I am an Enlightened Monk main. I began at Acceptance. Did Druids need buffs? Yes. They certainly needed some quality of life at the bare minimum, and Lunar Beam going untouched is absolutely criminal. Like, go to jail immediately style of class design. But it is what it is, and I still think that the class is pretty good at the job of doing all the normal tank stuff. Picking up enemies, using defensive cooldowns, mitigating damage. I think it is okay, even though obviously people are a little concerned. People are sweating right now. I think that things are still going to be pretty decent for Bear Druid going forward. You certainly will not regret playing Bear Druid, although you might regret emotionally investing in it as your main. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.